You ruined my life once. You won't do it again. Those words would destroy Detective Marcus Harrison's entire career in the most brutal way imaginable. Judge Diana Foster approached the courthouse steps in civilian clothes, her briefcase containing case files for her first day presiding here. But this wasn't just any courthouse. 15 years ago, at 19, she'd been wrongfully imprisoned in this exact building because Detective Harrison planted drugs in her car. Harrison stood at the entrance, his badge gleaming. He saw a black woman approaching, and his prejudice kicked in immediately. "Looks like trash keeps coming back," he sneered, blocking her path. His eyes showed zero recognition. The terrified teenager he'd framed had become a confident professional, but his hatred remained unchanged. "Detective, I have business inside." His open palm cracked across Diana's face with brutal force. Her briefcase flew from her grip, documents scattering everywhere. "You ruined my life once," Diana whispered, her voice steady despite the burning pain. "You won't do it again." Harrison grabbed her throat and slammed her against the wall. "Scum like you never learns." As handcuffs bit into her wrists, Harrison had no idea. He'd just assaulted a federal judge, the same woman whose life he'd destroyed 15 years ago. If you believe that no one should ever face false imprisonment and have their life destroyed by corrupt officials, type justice below. Then comment your country and city. Let's see where people stand against police corruption worldwide. Your participation shows that accountability knows no borders. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps as Harrison dragged Diana toward the courthouse entrance. Officers Kevin Bryant and Daniel Hughes emerged from their positions, drawn by the commotion like predators sensing an easy victim. "Got another one trying to breach security," Harrison announced with smug satisfaction. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been challenged in 25 years of police work. "Same story every damn time. They never learn their place." Bryant pulled out his phone immediately, recording what he assumed would be another routine arrest to share later with colleagues. "What's the charge, Harrison?" "Trespassing on federal property, resisting arrest, assault on a police officer," Harrison replied, his lies flowing like water from a poisoned well. Each fabrication was carefully calculated, designed to justify the brutal violence Diana had just endured. Subject became violent and combative when confronted about unauthorized access to courthouse grounds. The irony was suffocating. Harrison was charging Diana with assaulting him, when moments earlier he had backhanded her across the face with enough force to leave a purple bruise that would be visible for days. But this was his standard playbook, refined over decades of transforming his victims into criminals through the systematic abuse of his authority. Diana remained perfectly silent as Harrison recited his fabricated charges to the gathering officers. Her legal mind was already working, cataloguing every violation of procedure, every constitutional right trampled, every piece of evidence that would soon destroy Harrison's career. The bruise on her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, but her thoughts were crystal clear. She had spent 3 years in prison for a crime she didn't commit. 3 years stolen from her youth because Harrison had planted cocaine in her car during a routine traffic stop. 3 years of her life destroyed so Harrison could pad his arrest statistics and advance his career on the backs of innocent people who looked like her. But those 3 years hadn't broken her. They had transformed her into something Harrison could never comprehend, a weapon of pure legal justice wrapped in judicial authority. Inside the courthouse, Harrison felt the familiar rush of power that always came with a successful arrest. Security guards nodded respectfully as he passed. Court personnel stepped aside to give him space. Even the marble walls seemed to acknowledge his dominance in this building. "Another one for processing, Hughes," Harrison said to the desk sergeant, his chest puffed with pride. The adrenaline was still pumping through his veins, making him feel invincible. Subject was acting suspiciously near the courthouse entrance, carrying what appeared to be stolen or forged legal documents. Sergeant Hughes barely looked up from his paperwork. After working with Harrison for 12 years, this was just another routine booking in an endless stream of arrests. Same procedures as always. Absolutely, standard processing, standard charges. She'll be arraigned later today, plead guilty or get convicted, and we'll never see her again. Harrison's confident prediction would prove to be catastrophically wrong in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. In the courthouse holding area, Diana sat on the cold metal bench with perfect posture, despite the handcuffs cutting into her wrists. Her professional clothes were wrinkled from Harrison's assault, but her mind was sharper than ever. She was sitting in the same holding cell where she'd waited 15 years ago, terrified and alone, before being convicted of possession with intent to distribute. The memories came flooding back with painful clarity. The judge who hadn't believed her protests of innocence, the public defender who had barely glanced at her case before recommending a guilty plea, the jury who had looked at her with contempt rather than compassion, the system that had chewed her up and spit her out without a second thought. But Diana Foster wasn't that scared 19-year-old girl anymore. She had transformed her rage into education, her despair into determination, her victimhood into power. While serving her sentence, she had earned her college degree through correspondence courses. After her release and exoneration when the real criminal confessed, she had attended law school on a full scholarship. She had passed the bar exam on her first attempt and spent 10 years as a civil rights attorney before being appointed as a federal judge. And now, through cosmic justice or divine intervention, she found herself back in the exact courthouse where her nightmare had begun, wearing handcuffs placed by the exact detective who had destroyed her life 15 years ago. Harrison had no idea that his victim was also his judge. He had no idea that every lie he told would soon be used as evidence in his own prosecution. He had no idea that the scared teenager he remembered had become the one person with the constitutional authority to destroy his entire existence. The trap had been set 15 years ago when Harrison chose to plant drugs in an innocent girl's car. Today he had walked directly into that trap by assaulting the federal judge she had become. And Diana Foster was about to spring that trap with devastating precision. But first, she would let Harrison hang himself with his own lies. But Detective Harrison had no idea that 15 years ago, he destroyed the life of the exact woman now sitting handcuffed before him. 15 years earlier, on a humid summer evening, 19-year-old Diana Foster drove home from her college classes at Chicago State University. She was a sophomore studying pre-law, maintaining a perfect 4.0 grade average while working 2 part-time jobs to pay her tuition. Her dreams were clear: become a lawyer, help people who couldn't help themselves, make a difference in a system that desperately needed change. Those dreams would die tonight in the most brutal way possible. Detective Marcus Harrison sat in his unmarked patrol car on the south side of Chicago, watching traffic pass with the calculating eyes of a hunter looking for easy prey. His arrest numbers had been declining for 3 consecutive months, and Captain Reynolds had made it clear that detectives who didn't produce results didn't keep their positions. Harrison needed arrests, and he needed them fast. When Diana's older Honda Civic passed his position, Harrison saw opportunity. Young black woman driving alone, older vehicle with a broken taillight that gave him legitimate probable cause for a traffic stop. Perfect target for what he had planned. He flipped on his lights and pulled Diana over on a dark stretch of street between streetlights. Diana's hands were shaking as she rolled down her window, but she tried to remain calm. She had never been stopped by police before, never had any interaction with law enforcement beyond the occasional friendly wave to officers patrolling campus. "License and registration," Harrison demanded without preamble, his flashlight shining directly into Diana's eyes to blind and disorient her. "Yes, officer, of course." Diana fumbled in her glove compartment for her registration, then pulled her license from her wallet with trembling fingers. "Is something wrong? Was I speeding?" "Step out of the vehicle," Harrison commanded, ignoring her question entirely. His voice carried an edge of aggression that made Diana's heart race with fear. "I'm sorry, why? What did I do wrong?" "I said step out of the vehicle. Don't make me repeat myself again." Harrison's hand moved toward his service weapon in a gesture that was clearly meant to intimidate rather than protect. Diana complied immediately. Her criminal justice textbooks having taught her that arguing with police during traffic stops was dangerous for people who looked like her. She stepped out of her car with her hands visible, trying to remember everything she'd learned about how to survive encounters with law enforcement. Harrison ordered her to stand at the rear of her vehicle while he conducted what he called a safety inspection of her car. Diana watched through the rear window as Harrison opened her glove compartment, then her center console, then began searching under her seats with systematic thoroughness. What Diana couldn't see was Harrison's right hand slipping into his jacket pocket and removing a small plastic baggie containing 3 grams of cocaine. Evidence from a prior arrest that should have been logged and stored, but instead remained in Harrison's possession for exactly this purpose. Harrison's fingers worked quickly and efficiently as he planted the cocaine under Diana's driver's seat, positioning it where he could discover it during his search. He'd done this exact same thing 17 times before over the past 6 years, and the procedure had become routine. Find a target who wouldn't be believed, plant the evidence, make the arrest, pad the statistics, advance the career. "Well, well, well," Harrison announced loudly, emerging from Diana's car with the baggie held high like a trophy. "Look what we have here. Cocaine concealed under the driver's seat. That's possession with intent to distribute." Diana's world stopped spinning. "What? No, that's not mine. I've never seen that before. I don't do drugs." "That's what they all say," Harrison replied with practiced boredom. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "Please, you have to believe me. I'm a college student. I don't use drugs. Someone must have planted that there." Diana's voice was rising with panic, her mind unable to comprehend what was happening to her life. "Are you accusing me of planting evidence?" Harrison's voice turned dangerous. "That's a serious allegation. One that's going to be noted in my report as further evidence of your criminal consciousness and guilty knowledge." The handcuffs clicked shut around Diana's wrists, tighter than necessary, cutting off circulation to her hands. Harrison shoved her roughly into the back of his patrol car, her head hitting the doorframe hard enough to leave a bruise. "My arrest stats just improved significantly," Harrison muttered to himself as he climbed into the driver's seat. In the rearview mirror, he could see Diana crying hysterically in the back seat, her perfect college student life disintegrating in real time. He felt nothing but satisfaction. This was just another arrest, another statistic, another step up the career ladder built on the backs of innocent people whose lives meant nothing to him. At the police station, Diana was processed through the system like a piece of meat through a grinder. Her fingerprints were taken. Her mugshot was captured with tears streaming down her face. Her personal belongings were confiscated and catalogued. Her phone calls to her mother went to voicemail because her mother was working the night shift at the hospital and couldn't answer. Diana spent that night in a holding cell with 15 other women, most of whom were there for prostitution or actual drug charges. She sat in the corner with her knees pulled to her chest, crying silently, wondering how her entire life had been destroyed in the span of 30 minutes. The next morning, a public defender named James Wilson met with Diana for exactly 7 minutes before her arraignment. He barely glanced at the police report before delivering his professional assessment. "The evidence is pretty clear," Wilson said, with the tired voice of someone who had stopped believing in the possibility of innocence years ago. "Detective Harrison found cocaine in your vehicle. His testimony will be considered highly credible by any jury. You're a young black woman with no resources for a vigorous defense. My strong recommendation is that you accept a plea deal." "But I didn't do anything wrong," Diana protested desperately. "That detective planted those drugs. I've never used cocaine in my entire life. You can drug test me right now." Wilson sighed with barely concealed impatience. "Ms. Foster, I've been a public defender for 12 years. I've heard that exact same story from literally hundreds of defendants. The courts don't believe it, juries don't believe it, and frankly, I don't believe it either. Take the plea deal. 3 years with possibility of parole after 18 months. It's the best outcome you're going to get." Diana's arraignment took less than 10 minutes. The judge barely looked at her as the charges were read. Possession of cocaine with intent to distribute. Diana tried to explain what really happened, but the judge cut her off mid-sentence. "Ms. Foster, save your story for trial if you choose to reject the plea offer, but I'll tell you right now, Detective Harrison is one of the most respected officers in this jurisdiction. His testimony has resulted in over 300 successful convictions. No jury is going to believe your word over his. Accept the plea deal and move forward with your life." The words hit Diana like physical blows. The system she had dreamed of serving, The justice she had hoped to deliver as a future lawyer was revealing itself to be nothing but a machine that destroyed innocent people to feed itself. But Diana Foster was not like other defendants. Even at 19, even terrified and alone, she possessed a core of steel that refused to break under pressure. "No," she said quietly, her voice steady despite her terror. "I will not plead guilty to something I didn't do. I want a trial." Wilson threw up his hands in frustration. "You're making a huge mistake, Miss Foster, but it's your life to destroy." The trial took place 6 weeks later in the same courthouse where Diana now sat in handcuffs 15 years later. Detective Harrison testified with perfect confidence, describing in detail how he had discovered cocaine under Diana's driver's seat during a routine traffic stop. His testimony was professional, credible, and completely fabricated from beginning to end. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a guilty verdict. Diana Foster was sentenced to 3 years in state prison for possession with intent to distribute despite having no prior criminal record, despite maintaining her innocence throughout the entire proceeding. Despite the complete absence of any other evidence besides Harrison's testimony and the planted cocaine. As Diana was led away in chains, Harrison stood in the courtroom gallery with his arms crossed and a satisfied smile on his face. Another successful conviction, another boost to his arrest and prosecution statistics, another step up the ladder of career advancement. He never gave Diana Foster another thought. She was just another criminal who got what she deserved, another statistic in his impressive law enforcement record. Harrison had no way of knowing that he had just created his own destroyer, and that 15 years later, that scared 19-year-old girl would return as a federal judge with the power to deliver absolute justice for what he had done to her. The drugs Harrison was using to frame Diana today were identical to the drugs he'd planted in her car 15 years earlier. Diana Foster spent the first 6 months of her 3-year sentence in complete despair. The transition from college sophomore to convicted felon had been so sudden, so brutal, that her mind struggled to process the reality of her situation. She was 19 years old, locked in a maximum security women's prison, surrounded by actual criminals, labeled as a drug dealer for the rest of her life. Her cellmate was a woman named Margaret Richardson, serving her 8th year of a 15-year sentence for armed robbery. Margaret was 43 years old, had been in and out of prison since she was 16, and had seen every type of inmate the system could produce. "You're innocent, aren't you?" Margaret asked Diana one night, watching the young woman cry herself to sleep for the 100th consecutive time. Diana nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "Let me guess. Detective planted evidence during a traffic stop, no witnesses. Your word against a cop's. Public defender told you to take a plea deal, but you insisted on trial. Jury convicted you in a few hours." Diana's head snapped up in shock. "How did you know?" Margaret's smile was bitter with the wisdom of someone who had learned the system's darkest secrets through painful experience. "Because it's the oldest play in the corrupt cop playbook. I've met at least a dozen women in here with the exact same story. Different cities, different cops, same pattern. They plant drugs, make arrests, pad their statistics, advance their careers. And innocent people like you pay the price." "So what am I supposed to do?" Diana whispered, her voice breaking with despair. "I've lost everything. My college dreams are gone. My future is destroyed. I'm going to be a convicted felon for the rest of my life." Margaret sat up on her bunk and looked directly into Diana's eyes with an intensity that demanded attention. "You've got 2 choices. Kid, you can let this break you, turn you into another lost soul who gives up and dies in here, or you can let it forge you into something stronger than steel." "How? I'm in prison for 3 years for something I didn't do." "And you've got 3 years to prepare for the moment you get out. Read law books, study criminal procedure. Learn every trick these corrupt cops use so you can recognize and fight them. Transform yourself from a victim into a weapon." Those words changed Diana Foster's entire trajectory. The next morning, she requested access to the prison law library. The librarian, a kind older woman named Patricia who had seen too many innocent people destroyed by the system, took Diana under her wing and began teaching her how to research legal precedents. Diana threw herself into legal education with the intensity of someone who had found a life raft in the middle of a drowning ocean. She read every law book in the prison library, some of them multiple times. She studied Supreme Court decisions, criminal procedure manuals, evidence rules, constitutional law foundations. While other inmates watched television or played cards, Diana sat in the library corner taking notes in careful handwriting on legal pads provided by Patricia. She also began documenting everything she could remember about Detective Harrison's arrest. The exact time of the traffic stop, the specific words Harrison had used, the way he had positioned himself to block the view of passing cars, the suspicious amount of time he'd spent searching under her driver's seat before discovering the cocaine. Every detail was carefully recorded in a journal that Diana kept hidden from the guards. After 1 year in prison, Diana had completed the equivalent of an undergraduate degree in criminal justice and legal studies through correspondence courses arranged by Patricia. After 2 years, she had begun preparing applications for law school admission, despite still being incarcerated. After 2.5 years, she had been accepted to Northwestern University School of Law with a full scholarship contingent on her release. And then, 29 months into her 3-year sentence, Diana's life changed again in the most unexpected way possible. A man named Robert Chen walked into a Chicago police station and confessed to a string of drug offenses, including the exact crime for which Diana Foster had been convicted. Chen was dying of cancer, had 3 months to live according to his doctors, and wanted to clear his conscience before death. He provided details about his crimes that only the actual perpetrator could have known, including specific information about cocaine he had hidden in cars throughout the south side of Chicago. One of those cars matched the exact description of Diana's Honda Civic, down to the broken taillight and the specific location where the cocaine had been found. The confession triggered an automatic review of Diana's conviction. A new public defender, this one actually competent and motivated, requested DNA testing on the cocaine baggie that had been used to convict Diana. The results came back showing Robert Chen's fingerprints and DNA, with absolutely no trace evidence connecting Diana to the drugs whatsoever. Diana Foster was exonerated after serving 2 years and 9 months of her 3-year sentence. The state issued a formal apology. Her criminal record was expunged. She was offered a modest financial settlement that she accepted only to fund her continued education. But no one investigated why Detective Harrison had found drugs in Diana's car that forensically belonged to someone else. No one questioned how those drugs had ended up in her vehicle. No one looked into whether Harrison had a pattern of planting evidence. The system apologized for the mistake but never acknowledged the crime. Diana walked out of prison on a cold November morning, her small box of belongings under her arm, her acceptance letter to Northwestern Law School clutched in her hand. She stood on the prison steps and looked back at the building that had housed her for nearly 3 years. Then forward toward the city where her new life would begin. "I will never forget what you did to me, Detective Harrison," she whispered to the wind, "and one day you will answer for every life you destroyed." Diana entered law school the following semester with a single-minded focus that amazed her professors and intimidated her classmates. She graduated summa cum laude 3 years later, passed the bar exam with one of the highest scores in Illinois history, and immediately began working for the Civil Rights Division of a prestigious Chicago law firm. For the next 10 years, Diana Foster specialized in police misconduct cases. She represented victims of false arrests, planted evidence, excessive force, and systematic corruption. She won case after case, securing millions of dollars in settlements and sending corrupt officers to prison. Her reputation grew until she became known as the lawyer that dirty cops feared most. And every single case she worked, every corrupt officer she exposed, every victim she helped vindicate, Diana thought about Detective Marcus Harrison. She requested his arrest records through Freedom of Information Act requests. She documented patterns in his cases. She identified at least 11 other instances where Harrison's arrests had been suspiciously similar to her own experience. But Harrison was protected by the system. Every complaint against him was dismissed as unsubstantiated. Every investigation went nowhere. Every attempt Diana made to expose his corruption ran into institutional walls built to protect bad cops from accountability, until 5 years ago when Diana Foster was appointed as a federal judge for the Northern District of Illinois. Her appointment was based on her extraordinary legal mind, her impeccable record of civil rights advocacy, and her deep understanding of criminal justice reform. At 34 years old, she became one of the youngest federal judges in the country, and her first official act was to request assignment to the courthouse where she had been convicted 15 years earlier, the same building where Detective Harrison conducted most of his cases, the same jurisdiction where he operated with impunity. Diana had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. She had transformed herself from a terrified teenager into a federal judge with constitutional authority over every case in Harrison's jurisdiction. She had the power to review his arrests, question his testimony, and finally hold him accountable for the countless lives he had destroyed. But she never imagined that Harrison would hand her the perfect opportunity by assaulting her on her first day in the building. She never expected him to be so arrogant, so confident in his immunity, that he would commit the exact same crime against her twice. Detective Marcus Harrison had no idea that the woman sitting in handcuffs in the holding cell was not just a federal judge. She was his past victim returned as his future destroyer, and she had been waiting 15 years for this exact moment of cosmic justice. Diana sat in the same holding cell where she'd spent 3 years of her life for a crime she never committed. The metal bench was exactly as uncomfortable as she remembered. The walls were the same institutional grey that had haunted her nightmares for years after her release. Even the smell was identical, a mixture of industrial cleaner, human despair, and institutional indifference. But everything else had changed. 15 years ago, Diana had sat on this bench as a terrified 19-year-old girl, crying because her entire future had just been stolen. Today, she sat here as a federal judge, with the constitutional authority to destroy the man who had destroyed her. The irony was so profound, it was almost beautiful. Diana closed her eyes and let her legal mind catalogue every violation of procedure that Harrison had committed in the past hour. Assault in the first degree, 15 years mandatory minimum. Assault on a federal judicial officer, 10 years mandatory minimum, no possibility of parole. Deprivation of civil rights under color of law, up to life in prison when the violation involves assault. False arrest, federal civil rights violation. Unlawful detention, constitutional violation. And those were just the charges from today. When Diana added the historical evidence of Harrison planting drugs 15 years ago, the charges would multiply exponentially. Conspiracy to violate civil rights, evidence tampering, perjury in her original trial, obstruction of justice. The list went on and on. Harrison was looking at 40 years minimum in federal prison, possibly life, and he had absolutely no idea what was coming for him. Diana's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Through the bars of her cell, she could see Prosecutor Michelle Parker walking toward her with a folder tucked under her arm. Parker was a young prosecutor, maybe 28 years old, who had been assigned to handle Diana's arraignment. "Ms. Doe," Parker said, reading from Harrison's arrest report, which had deliberately listed Diana as Jane Doe to further dehumanize her. "I'm Prosecutor Parker. I'll be handling your case this morning." Diana remained silent, observing Parker with the trained eye of someone who had spent a decade litigating against prosecutors just like her. Young, ambitious, overwhelmed by caseload, predisposed to believe police testimony, looking for quick plea deals to manage the flood of cases crossing her desk. "Detective Harrison has charged you with trespassing on federal property, resisting arrest and assault on a police officer," Parker continued, flipping through her notes. "These are serious charges. The assault on an officer alone carries a mandatory minimum of 2 years in state prison." Parker paused, waiting for Diana to react with the panic and desperation that most defendants showed when confronted with potential prison time. But Diana's expression remained perfectly calm, her eyes steady and evaluating. "However," Parker continued, slightly unnerved by Diana's composure, "the district attorney's office is willing to offer you a deal. Plead guilty to trespassing and resisting arrest. Drop the assault charge, and you'll serve 6 months in county jail with credit for time served. It's a very generous offer given the circumstances. Diana almost smiled. The offer was identical to the plea deal she'd been pressured to accept 15 years ago. The system hadn't changed at all. Different names, same patterns, same assumptions that defendants would accept guilt for crimes they didn't commit, just to avoid worse punishment. "I respectfully decline your offer," Diana said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone completely comfortable with legal proceedings. "I intend to plead not guilty to all charges and request a full trial with all constitutional protections afforded to defendants." Parker's eyebrows rose in surprise. Most defendants facing serious charges jumped at any opportunity to reduce their potential sentences. "Ms. Doe, I strongly advise you to reconsider. Detective Harrison is a highly respected officer with 25 years of experience and an impeccable record. His testimony will be extremely credible to any jury. Your chances of acquittal are essentially zero." "Nevertheless, I decline the plea offer and request a full trial," Diana repeated, her tone polite but absolutely firm. Parker sighed with the frustration of someone who had just seen an easy case become complicated. "It's your choice, but you're making a serious mistake. I'll inform the judge that you're requesting trial. Your arraignment will be this afternoon before Judge Robert Palmer." Diana's eyes gleamed at the mention of Judge Palmer. She knew Robert Palmer. They had worked together on the federal bench for the past 3 years. Palmer was a fair judge, meticulous about procedure, absolutely intolerant of police misconduct when it was properly documented. He was also one of the few people in the courthouse who knew about Diana's appointment to the building and would immediately recognize that something was seriously wrong. After Parker left, Diana was moved to a different holding area closer to the courtroom where her arraignment would take place. As she sat waiting, she mentally reviewed the evidence that would soon expose Harrison's crimes. The courthouse security cameras had captured everything from multiple angles: Harrison's unprovoked assault, the backhand across her face, the chokehold against the wall, the excessive force during the arrest. Every frame would be preserved and analyzed, showing exactly what happened without any possibility of dispute. Harrison's body camera backup files, automatically uploaded to county servers, regardless of any claimed equipment malfunction, would show his private commentary before and during the assault. Diana had studied the body camera policies extensively and knew that Harrison's malfunctioning camera claim was provably false. Officers Bryant and Hughes had recorded the arrest on their personal phones, creating additional evidence that would contradict Harrison's fabricated narrative about Diana being violent or combative. Most importantly, Diana's own phone had been recording audio in her pocket throughout the entire encounter. The recording captured Harrison's racist language, his admission that Diana was being arrested without cause, and his explicit acknowledgement that he was abusing his authority. But Diana's most powerful evidence wasn't technological. It was documentary. She had her judicial appointment letter in her briefcase. She had her federal identification in her wallet. She had building access credentials programmed with her biometric data. She had parking passes, case files, administrative correspondence, and dozens of other documents that conclusively proved her identity and her legitimate authority to be in the courthouse. Harrison had arrested a federal judge while she was carrying the evidence of her own appointment. The cosmic stupidity of his actions would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. Diana thought about the 11 other victims she had identified through her research into Harrison's career. 11 people who had been convicted based on planted evidence, false testimony, and systematic corruption. 11 families destroyed. 11 lives stolen. 11 miscarriages of justice that the system had ignored because Harrison wore a badge. Today, all 11 of those victims would finally get their justice. Diana would make sure of it. The door to the holding area opened and a bailiff appeared. A large man Diana recognized immediately. His name was Thomas Morrison, and he had been a bailiff in this courthouse for 20 years. Diana had seen him during her own trial 15 years ago, standing in the background while Harrison testified against her. "Time for your arraignment," Morrison announced, then stopped suddenly as he got a clear look at Diana's face. His expression shifted from routine boredom to confusion, then to something that looked like recognition mixed with horror. "Judge Foster?" Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible. Is that you? What the hell is going on? Diana's eyes met Morrison's, and she saw the exact moment when he realized the magnitude of what had happened. A federal judge had been arrested and detained in his courthouse by a detective who apparently had no idea who she was. "Bailiff Morrison," Diana said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of her judicial position despite the handcuffs on her wrists. "I need you to do something very important for me. Anything, Your Honor, absolutely anything. I need you to go directly to Chief Judge Palmer's chambers and inform him that I've been detained. Tell him I need him to preside over my arraignment personally. Tell him it's urgent and that he should review courthouse security footage from this morning before court begins. Can you do that?" Morrison nodded vigorously, his face pale with shock and barely controlled anger at what had been done to a federal judge in his courthouse. "Right away, Your Honor. I'll get Judge Palmer immediately." As Morrison hurried away, Diana felt the pieces of her trap clicking into place. Palmer would see the security footage. He would understand immediately what had happened. He would preserve all evidence and notify the appropriate federal authorities. And most importantly, he would ensure that Harrison's arraignment proceeded exactly according to constitutional procedure, creating an unimpeachable legal record of every lie Harrison told under oath. In about 30 minutes, Harrison would enter a courtroom expecting a routine proceeding that would end with another conviction. Instead, he would walk into the most devastating reversal of power in courthouse history. Diana Foster had been waiting 15 years for this moment. She had been prepared for this confrontation since the day she walked out of prison and vowed to transform herself into Harrison's destroyer. She had earned a law degree, passed the bar, built a reputation, and secured a federal judgeship, all with the singular goal of eventually bringing Harrison to justice. And Harrison, in his arrogance and hatred, had given her the perfect opportunity by assaulting her on her first day in the building. He had committed the exact same crime against the exact same victim, not recognizing that his victim had transformed into his judge. The trap had been set 15 years ago when Harrison planted drugs in an innocent girl's car. Today, he had walked directly into that trap by assaulting the federal judge she had become. And in about 30 minutes, Diana Foster would spring that trap with the full force of constitutional authority behind her. Detective Marcus Harrison's entire life was about to end, and he had no idea the executioner was the same person he'd destroyed 15 years earlier. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes justice just needs 15 years to sharpen its blade before delivering the perfect strike. Harrison was about to commit perjury in front of the one person who knew exactly how he fabricated evidence. The temporary courtroom filled with the usual afternoon crowd, lawyers, defendants, court staff, observers drawn by routine justice. Most expected nothing unusual, just another series of arraignments in the endless stream of cases. Detective Marcus Harrison stood outside adjusting his uniform, badge polished to brilliant shine. He'd testified hundreds of times over 25 years, and the process had become routine as breathing. He would take the stand, describe his arrest of a criminal breaching courthouse security, detail the suspect's violent resistance and assault, and watch as the judge accepted his testimony as absolute truth. Another conviction would be added to his record. Harrison had no idea this routine arraignment would destroy his entire life, orchestrated by the woman he'd destroyed 15 years earlier. Inside the courtroom, Chief Judge Robert Palmer reviewed courthouse security footage Bailiff Morrison had urgently brought him. Palmer's face darkened with each frame. The assault was clear, brutal, unprovoked. The racist language undeniable, the excessive force shocking. But what made Palmer's blood run cold was the victim's identity. Judge Diana Foster, newly appointed to this courthouse, assaulted on her first day by a detective who clearly had no idea who she was. Palmer had known Diana for 3 years since her federal appointment. He knew her background, her wrongful conviction, her extraordinary rise from prisoner to federal judge. He knew she'd specifically requested assignment to this courthouse, and now he understood exactly why. "Get Detective Harrison in here immediately," Palmer ordered Morrison. "And notify FBI agent Rebecca Collins from Civil Rights Division. Tell her we have a federal incident requiring immediate response." Palmer knew this case would be historic, A detective assaulting a federal judge was unprecedented, but a detective assaulting the same woman he'd falsely imprisoned 15 years ago, that was cosmic justice delivering itself. In the holding area, Diana remained perfectly calm despite the handcuffs cutting into her wrists. Her legal mind was cataloguing evidence, preparing arguments, constructing the case that would destroy Harrison completely. Officers Bryant and Hughes lounged near the processing desk, joking about the morning's arrest. Neither man had any idea they were about to become defendants in a massive federal conspiracy case. "Harrison really showed that one who's boss," Bryant laughed, scrolling through his phone video. "Did you see how hard he hit her? Dropped her like a sack of potatoes." Hughes grinned. Best part was when she tried claiming she had legitimate business here. They always make up the craziest stories. Remember that guy last month who claimed he was the mayor's cousin? Their casual conversation was being recorded by courthouse surveillance, creating additional evidence of conspiracy and deliberate indifference to civil rights violations. Prosecutor Michelle Parker entered Palmer's chambers looking confused. "Your Honor, I was told you wanted to personally preside over the Jane Doe arraignment. That's highly unusual for such a routine case." Palmer's expression was grim. "Ms. Parker, this is not a routine case. The defendant is not Jane Doe. She is Judge Diana Foster, a federal judge appointed to this courthouse. Detective Harrison assaulted her this morning without recognizing her identity." Parker's face went completely white. "What? That's impossible. Harrison said—" "Whatever Harrison said was a lie," Palmer interrupted. "I've reviewed the security footage. It shows unprovoked assault, excessive force, and racist language. Harrison is about to commit perjury in my courtroom, and I need you to observe every word for the federal prosecution that will follow." Parker felt her carefully constructed case disintegrating. "Your Honor, I had no idea. If I'd known—" "You're not at fault, Ms. Parker. You relied on police reports that you had no reason to question. But now you know the truth, and you have ethical obligations under Brady and Giglio to preserve all evidence and correct any false statements." Palmer stood and adjusted his robes. "Let's proceed with the arraignment. I want every lie Harrison tells documented for the federal charges he'll be facing." In the courtroom, Harrison took his seat at the prosecution table, completely confident. He'd testified against Diana 15 years ago and watched her get convicted. He'd testified against hundreds of other defendants and watched them get convicted. This would be no different. What Harrison didn't know was that Judge Palmer had already contacted FBI agent Rebecca Collins. Federal investigators were already en route to secure evidence. The body camera backup files Harrison thought were deleted were already being downloaded. The security footage showing his assault was already being preserved. The trap was set, and Harrison was about to walk directly into it. "All rise," Bailiff Morrison announced. "Court is now in session." The Honorable Judge Robert Palmer presiding. Palmer entered and took his seat, his eyes sweeping the courtroom with the authority of someone who had presided over thousands of cases. "We're here for the arraignment of Jane Doe, arrested this morning by Detective Harrison on charges of trespassing, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer." Palmer paused deliberately. "Before we proceed, I want to state for the record that I have reviewed preliminary evidence suggesting serious irregularities in this arrest. Detective Harrison, you are still under oath from your initial statement. Do you understand that perjury carries severe criminal penalties?" Harrison shifted uncomfortably, sensing something wrong but unable to identify the danger. "Yes, Your Honor." "I understand." "Good. Please describe the events leading to this morning's arrest." Harrison stood, cleared his throat, and began his testimony. Every word was a lie, and every lie was being recorded for his future prosecution. "Your Honor, at approximately 8:45 this morning, I was conducting routine security duties at the courthouse entrance when I observed the defendant engaging in suspicious behavior consistent with attempted unauthorized access." Palmer's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were laser-focused on Harrison's every word. The defendant appeared to be conducting surveillance of courthouse security procedures. She was carrying what appeared to be stolen or forged documents. Her behavior suggested criminal intent. Diana sat in the defendant's chair, handcuffed, listening to the same lies Harrison had told about her 15 years ago. Different details, same pattern, Same systematic abuse of authority. When I approached to investigate, the defendant became immediately hostile and verbally abusive. She refused to provide proper identification and made threatening statements about my career and position. Palmer leaned forward. What specific threatening statements did the defendant make? Harrison didn't hesitate. She said I would regret stopping her, that I didn't know who I was dealing with, that she would have my badge. Classic intimidation tactics we see from career criminals. The irony was suffocating. Harrison was describing Diana's attempts to identify herself as a federal judge as intimidation tactics from career criminals. Continue, Palmer said coldly. The defendant attempted to physically assault me when I tried to verify her identification. She swung at my face, forcing me to use defensive measures. When I attempted to secure her hands for everyone's safety, she violently resisted, requiring additional officers to assist. Every sentence was perjury. Every detail was fabrication. Every word was being recorded. Detective Harrison, Palmer said carefully, you're stating under oath that the defendant initiated physical violence against you? Absolutely, Your Honor. I showed remarkable restraint given her aggressive behavior. A less experienced officer might have used much more significant force. Palmer made notes on his legal pad, his handwriting precise. And you're certain about these facts? You're willing to stake your career and freedom on this testimony? Harrison's confidence wavered slightly at the unusual phrasing, but he pressed forward. Yes, Your Honor. Everything I've stated is absolutely true. I see, Palmer said quietly. We'll return to your testimony shortly. First, I'd like to hear from the defendant. Bailiff Morrison, please bring Judge Foster to the defense table. The words hit the courtroom like a nuclear bomb. Judge Foster, not Jane Doe, Judge Foster. Harrison's face drained of all color as the implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. His hands began shaking. His breathing became labored. His entire world started collapsing. Palmer continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. For the record, the defendant is Judge Diana Foster, federal judge appointed to this courthouse. She was approaching the building this morning for her first day of judicial duties when Detective Harrison assaulted her without provocation. Harrison tried to speak, but no words emerged from his paralyzed throat. Officers Bryant and Hughes stood frozen in shock. Prosecutor Parker put her head in her hands. Detective Harrison, Palmer said with devastating calm, you've just committed perjury in federal court. But before we address that crime, I believe Judge Foster has something she'd like to say about your testimony. Diana stood slowly, the handcuffs clinking. When she spoke, her voice carried 15 years of controlled fury. Thank you, Your Honor. I do have something to say about Detective Harrison's testimony. But first, I'd like to address something from 15 years ago, when Detective Harrison testified under oath about finding drugs in my car, drugs he had actually planted there himself. Harrison's knees buckled and he collapsed into his chair, his career and freedom ending in the span of 30 seconds. Every lie Harrison told under oath was digging his grave deeper. And he had no idea his victim was also his judge. Diana Foster stood at the defense table, still in handcuffs, but her bearing was that of someone completely in control of the proceedings. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent a decade in courtrooms, but now from the other side of the bench. Your Honor, Diana continued, her eyes locked on Harrison's terrified face. Detective Harrison's testimony today is remarkably similar to testimony he gave 15 years ago in this exact courthouse. Then, as now, he claimed I was acting suspiciously. Then, as now, he claimed I became violent when confronted. Then, as now, every word was a complete fabrication. Judge Palmer leaned forward with intense interest. Judge Foster, are you stating that Detective Harrison has a history of false testimony against you specifically? Yes, Your Honor. 15 years ago, when I was 19 years old, Detective Harrison stopped me during a traffic stop and planted cocaine in my vehicle. He then testified under oath that he had discovered the drugs during a legitimate search. His testimony resulted in my wrongful conviction and a 3-year prison sentence. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Prosecutor Parker stood abruptly, her face pale. Your Honor, if these allegations are true, This represents a massive breach of— The allegations are absolutely true, and Diana interrupted, her voice steady. I was exonerated after 2 years and 9 months when the actual perpetrator confessed on his deathbed. DNA evidence proved conclusively that I had never touched the cocaine found in my vehicle. The only logical explanation is that Detective Harrison planted the evidence. Harrison finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. That's not true. I would never— You would never plant evidence. Diana's voice turned razor sharp. Detective Harrison, you planted cocaine in my car 15 years ago. You testified falsely at my trial. You destroyed 3 years of my life, and this morning you assaulted me with the exact same pattern of behavior. Unprovoked violence followed by false accusations. Judge Palmer raised his hand for silence. Detective Harrison, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I remind you that you are still under oath. Did you plant evidence in Ms. Foster's vehicle 15 years ago? Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His lawyer, hastily summoned during the proceedings, grabbed his arm and whispered urgently in his ear. Detective Harrison invokes his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, the lawyer announced. Palmer nodded grimly. So noted. Judge Foster, please continue. Diana took a deep breath, her mind sharp despite the emotional weight of confronting her past trauma. Your Honor, I'd like to request that this court review several pieces of evidence that will conclusively prove Detective Harrison's testimony. Today was perjury. Proceed. First, I request that courthouse security footage from this morning be entered into evidence. The cameras positioned at the main entrance captured the entire encounter in high-definition video from multiple angles. Palmer nodded to Bailiff Morrison, who immediately began setting up the courtroom's video display system. Within minutes, the security footage began playing on the large screen visible to everyone in the courtroom. The video was devastating in its clarity. It showed Diana approaching the courthouse steps carrying her briefcase, walking with calm purpose. It showed Harrison blocking her path. It captured his racist language clearly through the audio feed. And most importantly, it showed Harrison's open palm strike across Diana's face with brutal clarity. Completely unprovoked, entirely excessive, absolutely criminal. The courtroom watched in horrified silence as Harrison grabbed Diana's throat and slammed her against the wall. Several spectators gasped audibly. Prosecutor Parker looked like she was about to be sick. As the video clearly shows, Diana continued, I did not swing at Detective Harrison. I did not become violent. I did not resist arrest until after he assaulted me without provocation. Every element of his testimony was false. Harrison slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. His lawyer was frantically taking notes, already calculating the decades his client would spend in federal prison. Second, Diana continued, I request that Detective Harrison's body camera backup files be retrieved from county servers. Detective Harrison claimed his body camera malfunctioned this morning, but county policy requires automatic backup uploads every 60 seconds regardless of local equipment status. Palmer turned to Morrison. Bailiff, contact county IT immediately and have them send the backup files to this courtroom. Already done, Your Honor, Morrison replied. The files were transmitted 10 minutes ago. I have them ready for display. The body camera footage began playing, and it was even more damning than the security footage. Harrison's private commentary before approaching Diana was filled with racist assumptions and obvious prejudice. His escalation to violence was captured in first-person perspective, showing exactly how unprovoked his assault had been. But the most devastating moment came from the audio, when Harrison's voice clearly stated, "Time to teach another lesson to someone who doesn't know her place." The phrase "another lesson" was particularly damning, suggesting a pattern of similar behavior over time. Diana let the video play to its conclusion, then continued. Third, Your Honor, I have audio recording from my personal phone, which was recording in my pocket throughout the entire encounter. Objection! Harrison's lawyer stood desperately. Personal recordings without consent violate— Illinois is a one-party consent state for audio recordings, Diana countered immediately. I was a party to the conversation, therefore the recording is completely legal and admissible. Palmer nodded. Objection overruled. Play the recording. Diana's phone audio captured everything. Harrison's racist language, his unprovoked violence, his explicit statements that he was arresting her, despite knowing she claimed to have legitimate business in the courthouse. Most damning was the moment after the assault, when Harrison told officers Bryant and Hughes, "She's probably another con artist, but we'll sort it out later. Book her on everything and let the prosecutor worry about the details." The phrase, "let the prosecutor worry about the details," suggested Harrison knew his arrest was questionable, but didn't care about the legal consequences. "Finally," Diana said, "I'd like to enter into evidence my federal judicial credentials, my courthouse access badges, my parking permit and the case files I was carrying, all of which prove I had completely legitimate authority to be in this courthouse this morning." Morrison collected the documents from Diana's confiscated belongings and handed them to Judge Palmer, who examined them carefully. "These credentials are authentic," Palmer confirmed. "Judge Foster is indeed a federal judge appointed to this courthouse. Her access is unrestricted. She had every right to be approaching this building this morning." Harrison's lawyer leaned over and whispered urgently to his client. Harrison's face had gone from white to green, and he looked like he might vomit at any moment. "Detective Harrison," Palmer said coldly, "you've committed perjury in federal court. You've assaulted a federal judge. You've falsely arrested a federal judicial officer. And based on Judge Foster's testimony, you appear to have a 15-year history of planting evidence and destroying innocent lives." Palmer's voice grew harder with each charge. "This court is immediately referring this matter to the FBI's Civil Rights Division for federal prosecution. You are hereby relieved of duty pending investigation. Your badge and weapon will be surrendered to Bailiff Morrison immediately." Harrison stood on shaking legs and removed his badge with trembling hands. The symbol of authority he'd abused for 25 years was now being stripped away in public humiliation. But Diana wasn't finished. She had been waiting 15 years for this moment. And she intended to ensure that every victim of Harrison's corruption received justice. "Your Honor," Diana said quietly, "I have additional evidence regarding Detective Harrison's pattern of planting evidence and false testimony. With the court's permission, I'd like to present documentation of at least 11 other cases where Harrison's arrests followed the exact same pattern as my own wrongful conviction." Palmer's eyes widened. 11 other cases. "At minimum, Your Honor. I've been researching Detective Harrison's career for the past decade. I have case files, arrest reports, and statistical analyses that strongly suggest systemic corruption spanning his entire career." Harrison's lawyer stood desperately. "Your Honor, my client invokes his Fifth Amendment rights and requests immediate cessation of these proceedings until proper legal counsel can be arranged." "Denied," Palmer said flatly. Detective Harrison testified extensively under oath before invoking the Fifth Amendment. Those statements are part of the record, and Judge Foster isn't questioning your client. She's presenting evidence to this court." Diana pulled a thick folder from her briefcase, the same briefcase Harrison had knocked from her hands that morning. "Your Honor, these are summaries of 11 cases where Detective Harrison's arrest reports contain nearly identical language to the reports he filed about me. Same patterns of behavior, same descriptions of suspect resistance, same claims of discovered evidence." She handed the folder to Palmer, who began flipping through the pages with growing horror. "In each of these cases," Diana continued, "the defendant was a person of color with no prior criminal record. In each case, Harrison claimed to discover drugs during routine traffic stops. In each case, the defendants protested their innocence. And in at least 4 cases that I've been able to track, the defendants were later exonerated when evidence proved the drugs couldn't have been theirs. The implications were staggering. Harrison hadn't just destroyed Diana's life. He destroyed dozens of lives over his career, systematically planting evidence and falsifying testimony to advance his career statistics." Palmer closed the folder, his expression grim. "Detective Harrison, you're looking at federal charges that could result in life imprisonment. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done?" Harrison finally broke completely. "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. I never meant—" You never meant to get caught, Diana interrupted, her voice cold as ice. You meant to destroy my life. You meant to destroy the lives of at least 11 other innocent people. You meant to abuse your authority for personal gain. The only thing you didn't mean was to assault a federal judge who had the power to hold you accountable. The courtroom had no idea they were witnessing a detective testify against the woman whose life he'd already destroyed once. Judge Palmer called for a brief recess to allow federal authorities to arrive and begin securing evidence. FBI agent Rebecca Collins entered the courtroom 20 minutes later with a team of federal investigators, all wearing the serious expressions of people who understood they were dealing with a massive civil rights case. Collins was a 15-year veteran of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, specializing in police corruption cases. She'd prosecuted dozens of dirty cops. But this case was unprecedented in its scope and drama. Judge Palmer, Judge Foster, Collins said, nodding respectfully to both judges, I've been briefed on the situation. My team is already securing body camera backup files, courthouse surveillance footage, and Detective Harrison's arrest records for the past 25 years. Palmer gestured to the files Diana had presented. Agent Collins, Judge Foster has documented at least 11 other cases that appear to follow the same pattern as her own wrongful conviction. I believe you're looking at systematic civil rights violations spanning decades. Collins took the folder and flipped through it quickly, her trained eyes immediately recognizing the patterns Diana had identified. This is going to be one of the largest police corruption cases in Illinois history. Judge Foster, would you be willing to cooperate fully with our investigation? Diana's smile was grim. Agent Collins, I've been preparing for this investigation for 15 years. I have documentation, statistical analyses, witness lists, and legal briefs ready to go. Detective Harrison is about to discover that his victim spent a decade becoming the one person capable of destroying him completely. Collins returned the smile. Then let's get to work. Over the next hour, while Harrison sat in the courtroom under guard, the federal investigation expanded rapidly. Collins's team pulled Harrison's complete arrest records from county databases. They contacted the 11 defendants Diana had identified, offering to reopen their cases. They secured warrants for Harrison's personal communications, financial records, and any evidence that might be stored at his home. Most importantly, they pulled the backup files from Harrison's body camera for his entire career. Thousands of hours of footage that Harrison assumed had been deleted or lost, but were actually stored on secure federal servers as part of a pilot program he'd never bothered to learn about. The evidence was overwhelming. Harrison had planted evidence in at least 17 cases that could be definitively proven. He had committed perjury in at least 23 trials. He had assaulted suspects in at least 31 arrests. His body camera footage, combined with his arrest reports, created an undeniable pattern of systematic corruption. When court reconvened, Agent Collins stood before Judge Palmer with a preliminary report. Your Honor, based on our initial investigation, we're prepared to file federal charges against Detective Marcus Harrison for conspiracy to violate civil rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, evidence tampering, perjury, obstruction of justice, and assault on a federal officer. We're also opening investigations into officers Kevin Bryant and Daniel Hughes for conspiracy and obstruction. Bryant and Hughes, who had been watching the proceedings with growing horror, tried to leave the courtroom but found federal agents blocking the exits. Officers Bryant and Hughes, Collins continued, you are both under investigation for conspiracy to violate civil rights. You witnessed Detective Harrison assault Judge Foster this morning and did nothing to stop it. You then provided false statements supporting his fabricated arrest narrative. You will remain in this courthouse until we've completed our initial interviews. Palmer turned his attention back to Harrison. Detective Harrison, do you understand the charges that are being filed against you? Harrison's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client maintains his Fifth Amendment rights and... Your client already waived those rights when he testified extensively under oath, Palmer interrupted sharply. Those statements are part of the record and will be used in his prosecution. The only question now is whether he wants to cooperate with federal authorities or face the maximum possible sentences. Collins stepped forward. Detective Harrison, If you cooperate fully, and I mean fully, including testimony against any other officers who were involved in your schemes, the U.S. Attorney might consider reducing some charges. But if you continue to deny what we can already prove with video evidence and body camera footage, you're looking at 40 years minimum in federal prison. Harrison looked at his lawyer desperately. The lawyer shook his head grimly. Marcus, they have you dead to rights on video assaulting a federal judge. They have your body camera showing premeditated intent. They have evidence of a 15-year pattern of corruption. My professional advice is to cooperate fully and hope for mercy. But before Harrison could respond, Diana Foster spoke again. Detective Harrison, she said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom, I want you to understand something. I'm not pursuing these charges out of personal revenge. I'm pursuing them because you destroyed the lives of at least 17 innocent people that we know of, and probably dozens more we haven't identified yet. She paused, letting her words sink in. Every person you framed lost years of their life. Every family you destroyed suffered because you wanted better arrest statistics. Every innocent defendant who trusted the system to protect them was betrayed by your corruption. Diana's voice grew stronger. But here's what you need to understand about your situation. You didn't just assault any federal judge this morning. You assaulted the one federal judge who has spent the last 15 years becoming an expert on police corruption, specifically so she could recognize and destroy people like you. She pulled another folder from her briefcase. I have here the names and contact information for 32 of your arrest victims. I've been tracking your career for a decade, documenting your patterns, building cases. When I was appointed to this courthouse, I specifically requested assignment here because I knew eventually you'd reveal your corruption in a way I could prosecute. Harrison's face went from green to gray. You set me up, he whispered hoarsely. No, Diana corrected sharply. You set yourself up 15 years ago when you chose to destroy an innocent girl's life. I simply became the person capable of holding you accountable. Everything that's happening to you right now is the direct consequence of your own actions. She turned to Agent Collins. I have documentation on all 32 victims. Most were convicted based solely on Detective Harrison's testimony and planted evidence. I'd like to work with your office to reopen every single one of those cases and pursue compensation for the victims. Collins nodded eagerly. Judge Foster, that would be incredibly helpful. We're looking at potentially the largest mass exoneration in Illinois history. Palmer spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of institutional failure. This court owes a debt to Judge Foster for her extraordinary dedication to justice. Her personal experience with corruption, rather than making her cynical, transformed her into exactly the kind of judge our system desperately needs. He turned to Harrison with undisguised contempt. Detective Harrison, you represent everything wrong with law enforcement. You abused your authority, destroyed innocent lives, and corrupted the justice system for personal gain. The only fortunate element of this disaster is that you were arrogant enough to assault the one person with both the knowledge and the power to destroy you completely. Palmer's gavel came down with finality. This court is remanding Detective Marcus Harrison to federal custody pending trial on charges of assault on a federal officer, conspiracy to violate civil rights, evidence tampering, perjury, and obstruction of justice. Bail is denied given the severity of charges and the defendant's history of corruption. Federal agents moved forward to take Harrison into custody. As they placed him in handcuffs, the same handcuffs he'd used to restrain Diana that morning, Harrison finally understood the complete magnitude of his destruction. He'd assaulted a federal judge. That judge was a woman whose life he'd destroyed 15 years earlier. That woman had spent 15 years transforming herself into his destroyer. And now that woman had the constitutional authority and the documented evidence to send him to prison for the rest of his life. Judge Foster, Harrison said as the agents led him past her, his voice breaking with desperation. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for what I did to you 15 years ago. Diana looked at him with eyes that had seen too much pain to offer easy forgiveness. Detective Harrison, your apology means nothing. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you finally got caught. The difference matters. As Harrison was led away, Diana felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that had been pressing down for 15 years. Justice hadn't been quick, but it had been absolute. The scared 19-year-old girl who'd been framed and imprisoned had transformed into a federal judge capable of delivering constitutional justice. The corrupt detective who'd destroyed her life had become the defendant facing decades in prison. The circle was complete, and justice had finally been served. When those courtroom doors opened again, Harrison's 25-year career would end in seconds. The next phase of the proceedings focused on officers Kevin Bryant and Daniel Hughes, who had supported Harrison's false narrative and failed to intervene during his assault on Diana. FBI agent Collins had separated them for individual interviews, a standard tactic to prevent coordination of stories and identify inconsistencies. Officer Bryant was interviewed first in a courthouse conference room that had been converted into a temporary FBI field office. Agent Collins sat across from him with a thick file of evidence and a recording device running. "Officer Bryant," Collins began, "you're here voluntarily as a witness to this morning's incident involving Detective Harrison and Judge Foster. However, I want to make clear that you're also potentially subject to federal charges for conspiracy and obstruction. Do you understand your rights?" Bryant nodded nervously, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." "Good. Let's start with what you observed this morning. Tell me exactly what you saw when Detective Harrison encountered Judge Foster." Bryant swallowed hard, clearly wrestling with the decision to tell the truth or continue supporting Harrison's lies. "I saw Detective Harrison approach a woman near the courthouse entrance. I heard him say something about her not belonging there. Then I saw him strike her across the face." Collins leaned forward. "You saw Detective Harrison strike her, without provocation?" "Yes, ma'am. She didn't swing at him first or make any aggressive moves. He just hit her. And yet, when you arrived on scene, you recorded video that supported Detective Harrison's claim that she had assaulted him. Why did you do that?" Bryant's face flushed with shame. "Because Harrison's a 25-year veteran. Because I've been taught to back up other officers. Because I assumed the woman must have done something to deserve it, even if I didn't see it happen." Collins pulled out a transcript of Bryant's earlier statement to prosecutors. "According to your official statement, you witnessed the defendant swing at Detective Harrison and attempt to kick him. Was that statement true?" "No, ma'am, that was a lie. Harrison told me what to say in my report, and I repeated his version of events because that's what we're trained to do, support the arresting officer's narrative." Collins made notes on her legal pad. "Officer Bryant, I appreciate your honesty now, but you need to understand the severity of what you've admitted. You provided false statements to prosecutors about a federal judge being assaulted by a fellow officer. That's conspiracy to violate civil rights and obstruction of justice, both federal felonies carrying significant prison time." Bryant put his head in his hands. I know I screwed up. But if I'd contradicted Harrison, I'd have been blackballed from the force. My career would have been over." "Your career is over anyway," Collins said bluntly. "The only question now is whether you spend the next 10 years in federal prison, or whether you cooperate fully and potentially receive reduced charges." Bryant looked up with desperate hope. "What do I need to do?" "Tell me everything you know about Detective Harrison's pattern of false arrests. Every case you witnessed where evidence seemed suspicious. Every time you saw him use excessive force. Every incident where he coached you or other officers to support his version of events." Bryant took a deep breath and began talking. Over the next hour, he provided damning testimony about Harrison's corruption spanning the 5 years they'd worked together. He described at least 7 cases where Harrison's arrest reports seemed inconsistent with what Bryant had actually witnessed. He named 4 other officers who regularly supported Harrison's false narratives. He admitted to personally witnessing Harrison plant evidence on 2 separate occasions. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Hughes was being interviewed in a separate room by another FBI agent. Hughes was less cooperative than Bryant, initially refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. "I stand by my statement," Hughes insisted. "The defendant was acting suspiciously, became violent when confronted, and assaulted Detective Harrison. That's what I saw, and that's what I reported." The FBI agent pushed a tablet across the table, showing courthouse security footage. Officer Hughes. This video shows Detective Harrison striking Judge Foster without provocation. It shows her briefcase flying from her hands. It shows her making no aggressive moves whatsoever. Your statement is provably false. Hughes watched the video with growing discomfort, then pushed the tablet away. I want a lawyer. That's your right, the agent replied. But I want you to understand something. Officer Bryant is currently providing sworn testimony about Detective Harrison's pattern of corruption. He's naming every officer who participated in supporting Harrison's false narratives. Your name is on that list multiple times. Hughes's face paled. Bryant's cooperating? Fully. He's providing detailed testimony in exchange for reduced charges. You, on the other hand, are choosing to face the full weight of federal prosecution. That's your decision to make. The agent stood to leave. When you're ready to cooperate, let us know. But understand that every hour you wait, Officer Bryant is providing more testimony and securing better treatment for himself while you're digging your hole deeper. After the agent left, Hughes sat alone in the room contemplating his options. He'd been a police officer for 12 years, most of them working alongside Harrison. He'd witnessed things that had made him uncomfortable, but he'd always told himself that supporting other officers was part of the job. Now that blind loyalty was about to destroy his entire life. Back in the main courtroom, Judge Palmer was addressing the broader implications of Harrison's corruption. This court recognizes that the discovery of systematic police misconduct requires immediate institutional response. I'm therefore ordering the following emergency measures. He read from a prepared order that he'd been drafting during the recess. First, all cases involving testimony from Detective Marcus Harrison will be flagged for immediate review. Defendants currently incarcerated based solely or primarily on Harrison's testimony will be entitled to expedited appeals. Second, the police department will implement mandatory body camera usage with real-time backup to secure federal servers. Any officer who fails to activate their body camera will be subject to immediate suspension and investigation. Third, all officers who worked regularly with Detective Harrison will be required to submit to interviews with federal investigators. Failure to cooperate will result in termination and potential prosecution for obstruction. Fourth, this courthouse will establish a conviction integrity unit specifically to review potential wrongful convictions resulting from police misconduct. Judge Foster, given your unique expertise and perspective, I'd like to request your leadership of this unit. Diana stood and nodded. Your Honor, I'd be honored to lead that effort. I know firsthand how devastating wrongful convictions are. And I'm committed to ensuring that every victim receives justice. Palmer continued with his orders. Fifth, the police department will be placed under federal oversight pending completion of this investigation. The Department of Justice will assign monitors to review all arrest procedures and use-of-force incidents. Finally, this courthouse will be renamed the Justice Restoration Center, symbolizing our commitment to repairing the damage done by systematic corruption. The courtroom erupted in applause. Diana felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of pain this time, but tears of vindication. The system that had destroyed her had finally acknowledged its failure and committed to change. Agent Collins approached Diana after the proceedings concluded. Judge Foster, I need to ask you something. You said you've been researching Detective Harrison for 15 years. Did you know you'd eventually end up in a position to hold him accountable? Diana smiled. Agent Collins, from the moment I walked out of prison, I knew I would spend the rest of my life fighting police corruption. Whether that fight would specifically involve Harrison, I didn't know. But I prepared myself to recognize and expose corruption wherever I found it. Harrison just happened to be arrogant enough to assault me on my first day, giving me the perfect opportunity. Collins shook her head in amazement. You transformed your trauma into expertise, your victimhood into authority. That's extraordinary. No, Diana corrected gently. That's survival. That's what you do when the system destroys your life. You either let it break you or you become stronger than the system itself. Over the next several hours, the full scope of Harrison's corruption became clear. Officer Bryant's testimony revealed at least 7 confirmed cases of planted evidence. Officer Hughes eventually broke down. and admitted witnessing Harrison fabricate reports on multiple occasions. Body camera footage analysis revealed 31 instances of excessive force that had never been investigated. Most damning was the discovery of Harrison's personal notes, a journal he'd kept documenting his arrests, including coded references to enhanced evidence collection and narrative management. The journal proved systematic intent rather than isolated incidents. By evening, FBI agents had identified 43 potential victims of Harrison's corruption. 17 were still incarcerated based primarily on Harrison's testimony. 26 had completed their sentences, but carried felony records that destroyed their employment prospects and civil rights. All would be entitled to compensation and record expungement. Diana worked alongside Agent Collins, reviewing each case, her legal expertise helping identify which convictions were most clearly tainted by Harrison's misconduct. She knew these files intimately. She'd been studying them for years, waiting for the moment when she'd have the authority to act. As midnight approached, Diana finally removed her judicial robes and sat in her new chambers, the same building where she'd been convicted 15 years ago, but now as a federal judge rather than a convicted felon. Chief Judge Palmer knocked on her door. "Judge Foster, I wanted to personally thank you for your extraordinary service today. Your courage in confronting your past trauma while maintaining judicial composure was remarkable." Diana smiled tiredly. "Your Honor, I've been preparing for this day since I was 19 years old. Everything I've done, law school, civil rights work, my judicial appointment, was building toward the moment when I could hold corrupt officers accountable. Harrison just accelerated the timeline by assaulting me." Palmer sat down across from her. "What happens now? To you, I mean. You've spent 15 years focused on this goal. What do you do when the goal is accomplished?" Diana looked out her window at the city lights. "I continue the work, Your Honor. Harrison is one corrupt detective, but he represents a systemic problem that extends far beyond one man. There are thousands of Harrisons out there, destroying innocent lives every day. My job now is to use my position and my experience to reform the system that enabled him." Palmer nodded thoughtfully. "The Conviction Integrity Unit you'll be leading, that will be your legacy." "No," Diana said firmly. "My legacy will be every innocent person who doesn't get convicted because we fixed the system. Every life that doesn't get destroyed because we held bad cops accountable. Every family that doesn't have to suffer what my family suffered." She stood and looked at the photograph on her desk, her 19-year-old mugshot, which she kept as a reminder of where she'd come from and why her work mattered. "Harrison thought he destroyed me 15 years ago," Diana said quietly. "He had no idea he was creating his own destroyer. That's the thing about injustice, Your Honor. Sometimes it doesn't break people. Sometimes it forges them into weapons that eventually deliver perfect justice." Palmer stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Judge Foster, one more question. Did you ever imagine when you were sitting in that prison cell 15 years ago that you'd end up here?" Diana's smile was bittersweet. "Every single day, Your Honor. Every single day I imagined the moment when I'd have the power to ensure no one else suffered what I suffered. That dream kept me alive through 3 years of hell. And today, that dream became reality. The security footage didn't just capture today's brutality. It was about to expose a 15-year pattern of corruption. 3 weeks after Harrison's arrest, the federal investigation had expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations. FBI agent Rebecca Collins stood in a conference room surrounded by evidence boxes containing 2 decades of Harrison's arrest files, body camera footage, witness statements, and forensic analyses. "This is the largest single-officer corruption case in FBI history," Collins announced to her team of 12 agents who had been assigned to unravel Harrison's career of systematic misconduct. "We've identified 67 potential victims spanning Harrison's entire 25-year career." The lead forensic analyst, Dr. Patricia Chen, pulled up statistical data on the conference room screen. "The patterns are undeniable. Harrison's arrest rate was 300% higher than departmental average. His use of force incidents were 500% higher. And 92% of his arrests involved people of color, despite working in districts with much more diverse criminal activity. Another agent, Marcus Thompson, added context from witness interviews. We've spoken with 43 of the 67 identified victims. 38 describe nearly identical arrest patterns, traffic stops for minor violations, extended vehicle searches, sudden discovery of drugs or weapons, claims that suspects became violent when confronted. Collins reviewed the data with grim satisfaction. Every number confirmed what Judge Diana Foster had been documenting for years. Harrison was a systematic predator who had used his badge to destroy innocent lives for personal career advancement. "What's the status on the 17 currently incarcerated victims?" Collins asked. "Emergency appeals filed for all 17, responded Junior Agent Sarah Mitchell. "Based on Judge Foster's legal briefs and our forensic evidence, we expect all 17 to be released within 60 days. The evidence of Harrison's corruption is overwhelming." "Doctor," Chen pulled up another screen showing body camera analysis. "This is where it gets really interesting. We've analyzed over 3,000 hours of Harrison's body camera footage using AI pattern recognition software. The system identified 214 instances where Harrison's official reports contradicted what the body camera actually recorded. She played several video clips in sequence. Each showed the same pattern. Harrison approaching suspects calmly, then suddenly escalating to violence while claiming the suspect had attacked first. In every case, the body camera clearly showed the suspect making no aggressive moves before Harrison's assault. In legal terms, we're looking at 214 counts of perjury, 214 counts of filing false police reports, and potential civil rights violations for each incident. Collins calculated. Harrison could theoretically face over 1,000 years in prison if convicted on all charges. Agent Thompson raised an important point. The problem isn't just Harrison. We've identified at least 9 other officers who regularly supported his false narratives. Officers Bryant and Hughes are cooperating fully, but there are 7 others who aren't talking. Collins made notes on her tablet. Those 7 officers will face their own charges. Conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, filing false reports. We're dismantling an entire corruption network, not just one bad cop. The investigation had also uncovered financial corruption. Harrison had been receiving cash payments from a local bail bondsman in exchange for arresting people on fabricated charges. The bondsman made money when defendants paid bail, creating a financial incentive for Harrison to generate false arrests. "The bail bondsman angle adds racketeering charges," Collins explained to her team. "Harrison wasn't just corrupt, he was running a criminal enterprise using his badge as cover. This elevates everything to RICO territory." Dr. Chen pulled up forensic evidence from the drugs used in Harrison's planted evidence cases. "Here's something remarkable. We analyzed the cocaine from 17 different cases where Harrison claimed to discover drugs during traffic stops. The chemical signatures match each other, but don't match any drugs seized from actual dealers in the area." "What does that mean?" asked Agent Mitchell. "It means Harrison had a single source for his planted evidence. He wasn't randomly grabbing drugs from evidence lockup. He had a supplier specifically providing him with cocaine to plant on innocent people. We're tracking that supplier now." The implications were staggering. Harrison's corruption extended beyond individual misconduct into organized criminal conspiracy involving multiple participants and financial motives. Collins reviewed the charging documents being prepared by federal prosecutors. Harrison faces 47 federal counts currently, with more likely as the investigation continues. Officers Bryant and Hughes face 12 counts each for their cooperation in Harrison's schemes. 7 other officers face charges ranging from conspiracy to obstruction. "What about the police department leadership?" asked Thompson. "They ignored complaints about Harrison for decades. Are they facing charges?" Collins pulled up another file. "That's a separate investigation being handled by the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Captain James Reynolds, Harrison's direct supervisor, is under investigation for deliberate indifference to civil rights violations. The department as a whole is facing potential federal oversight and consent decree." The conference room door opened, and Judge Diana Foster entered, carrying her own files documenting Harrison's corruption. Collins had invited her to participate in the investigation as an expert consultant, given her unique expertise and personal experience. "Judge Foster, thank you for joining us," Collins said respectfully. "We're reviewing the full scope of Harrison's corruption and preparing for trial." Diana set down her files and surveyed the evidence boxes filling the room. "Agent Collins, I've been documenting Harrison's patterns for 15 years. I have case analyses, statistical models, and legal theories that will help you build the strongest possible prosecution." She pulled out a thick binder labeled Systematic Corruption Analysis, Detective Marcus Harrison. "This contains my research on 63 cases where Harrison's testimony was the primary or sole evidence of guilt. I've identified patterns in his language, tactics, and victim selection that prove systematic intent rather than isolated incidents." Dr. Chen reviewed Diana's analysis with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary work, Judge Foster. Your statistical models are more sophisticated than anything our forensic team produced. Where did you learn this level of analysis?" Diana's smile was grim. "Prison, Dr. Chen. I had 3 years with nothing to do but read statistics textbooks and study criminal justice patterns. I learned to recognize corruption because I was desperate to understand how the system had destroyed my life." Collins studied Diana with newfound respect. "You transformed your trauma into expertise that's now dismantling the system that hurt you." "Not just me," Diana corrected. "Harrison destroyed at least 67 lives that we know of. This investigation isn't about my personal revenge. It's about delivering justice for every victim who trusted the system to protect them and got betrayed instead." Harrison finally understood. He hadn't just attacked a judge, he'd attacked his own past victim. The federal detention center where Marcus Harrison awaited trial was a concrete fortress designed to hold defendants facing serious federal charges. Harrison sat in his cell wearing an orange jumpsuit, his police badge and authority stripped away, his future measured in decades rather than years. His court-appointed attorney, James Wilson, ironically the same public defender who had represented Diana Foster 15 years ago, sat across from him in the attorney meeting room, reviewing the overwhelming evidence. "Marcus, I'm going to be brutally honest with you," Wilson said, spreading out files showing body camera footage, witness statements, and forensic analyses. "The federal government has you on 47 counts with video evidence, forensic proof, and cooperating witnesses. You're looking at life in prison." Harrison's hands shook as he reviewed the evidence. "How did this happen? How did everything fall apart so fast?" Wilson looked at him with barely concealed contempt. "You assaulted a federal judge, Marcus. Not just any judge. The woman whose life you destroyed 15 years ago. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? I didn't know who she was. She looked different. I thought..." "You thought she was just another black woman you could abuse without accountability," Wilson interrupted sharply. "That's been your pattern for 25 years. The only difference this time is that your victim had the power to destroy you." Harrison put his head in his hands, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his denial. "What are my options?" Wilson pulled out the plea offer from federal prosecutors. "The government is offering a deal. You plead guilty to 25 counts, including assault on a federal officer, conspiracy to violate civil rights, evidence tampering, and perjury. In exchange, they'll drop 22 counts and recommend 40 years in federal prison." "40 years? I'll die in prison." "Yes, you will," Wilson said flatly. "The alternative is going to trial, being convicted on all 47 counts, and receiving a life sentence without possibility of parole. The government's evidence is overwhelming, Marcus. You have zero chance of acquittal." Harrison struggled to process the destruction of everything he'd built over 25 years. "What about my pension? My benefits?" "Forfeited," Wilson replied. "Federal conviction means you lose all law enforcement benefits. Your pension is gone, your health insurance is gone. Everything." The financial devastation was almost worse than the prison sentence. Harrison had planned to retire in 3 years with full benefits. Now he would die in federal prison with nothing. "There's more," Wilson continued grimly. "Judge Foster is leading a conviction integrity unit, reviewing all your arrests. The FBI has identified 67 potential victims of your corruption. Every single one is filing civil rights lawsuits against you personally and the police department. Harrison's face went pale. Civil suits, they can't. They absolutely can, Wilson interrupted. And they'll win massive judgments because the evidence of your corruption is undeniable. Your house, your savings, any assets you have, all will be seized to pay compensatory and punitive damages to your victims. The complete scope of his destruction was finally becoming clear. Prison for life, financial ruin, historical legacy as one of the most corrupt cops in American history. Everything destroyed because he'd assaulted the wrong woman on the wrong day. Why did Judge Foster request assignment to that courthouse? Harrison asked suddenly. That can't be coincidence. Wilson's expression turned even colder. It wasn't coincidence, Marcus. Judge Foster spent 15 years preparing to hold you accountable. She researched your cases, documented your patterns, built expertise in police corruption specifically, so she could recognize and prosecute officers like you. Then she requested assignment to your jurisdiction and waited for you to reveal your corruption in a prosecutable way. Harrison felt sick. She set me up. No, Wilson corrected sharply. She gave you every opportunity to recognize her authority and stop your assault. You chose to continue because your hatred and arrogance made you incapable of recognizing that your victim had transformed into your judge. This is entirely your fault. Harrison sat in silence, contemplating the ruins of his life. Then a thought occurred to him. What if I cooperate fully? What if I testify against the other officers involved? What if I provide information about the bail bondsman and the drug supplier? Wilson pulled out another document. The prosecutors anticipated that question. If you cooperate fully, and I mean fully, including testimony against Captain Reynolds and every other corrupt officer, they might reduce your sentence to 30 years. You'd still die in prison, but you'd have slightly better conditions. What do I have to do? Admit everything, Wilson said. Every planted evidence case, every false arrest, every victim you destroyed. You provide complete testimony about your corruption network, wear a wire to record conversations with co-conspirators, and testify at trial against every other officer involved. Harrison weighed his options: refuse cooperation and face life in prison, or betray every officer who had supported his corruption and face slightly less time in prison. I'll cooperate, he finally whispered. I'll tell them everything. Wilson made notes on his legal pad. I'll inform the prosecutors. But Marcus, understand something. Your cooperation doesn't earn you forgiveness. Judge Foster and the 67 victims you destroyed will never forgive you. History will remember you as a corrupt cop who destroyed innocent lives. Cooperation just means you die in prison at 80 instead of 70. That evening, Harrison was transferred to FBI headquarters for his first debriefing session. Agent Collins sat across from him with a recording device and a thick stack of case files. Detective Harrison, you've agreed to provide complete cooperation regarding your corrupt activities and the activities of other officers involved in civil rights violations. Is that correct? Yes, Harrison said quietly. Let's start with your most recent victim, Judge Diana Foster. Tell me exactly what happened 15 years ago when you arrested her as a teenager. Harrison took a deep breath and began confessing. I was working Southside Patrol. My arrest numbers were down and Captain Reynolds was threatening to reassign me. I needed arrests fast to improve my statistics. So you began targeting innocent people. I began conducting pretextual traffic stops, pulling people over for minor violations like broken taillights. Then I'd plant drugs I'd obtained from a supplier and arrest them for possession. Collins made notes. How many times did you plant evidence? I don't know exactly. Maybe 50 times over my career, maybe more. And Diana Foster was one of your victims. Harrison nodded miserably. She was a college student driving an older Honda with a broken taillight. Perfect target, young, black, alone. Wouldn't be believed if she complained. I pulled her over, planted cocaine under her driver's seat and arrested her. Then you testified falsely at her trial? Yes. I claimed I'd discovered the drugs during a legitimate search. I described her as acting nervous and suspicious. All lies. She was completely innocent. Collins felt rage building but maintained professional composure. And you felt no guilt, watching an innocent 19-year-old girl get convicted and sent to prison. Harrison's voice broke. I told myself she probably deserved it somehow, that everyone I arrested was guilty of something, even if not the specific charge. I convinced myself I was cleaning up the streets even if my methods were questionable. Your methods weren't questionable, Collins said coldly. They were criminal. You destroyed innocent lives to pad your statistics and advance your career. That's not law enforcement. That's organized crime. Over the next 4 hours, Harrison provided detailed confession about his corruption network. He named 7 other officers who regularly supported his false narratives. He identified Captain Reynolds as being aware of the corruption, but deliberately ignoring it. He revealed the bail bondsman who paid him cash for generating arrests, and he named his drug supplier, an evidence room clerk who had been stealing from lockup and selling to Harrison for planting. This evidence room clerk, Collins pressed, how long has this arrangement existed? About 12 years. He'd steal cocaine and pills from old cases, sell them to me at discount prices, and I'd use them for planted evidence. He made money. I got evidence for arrests. Everyone benefited except the innocent people we destroyed. Collins made notes. This clerk will be arrested tonight. Continue. Harrison described the systematic corruption that had infected his entire unit. False reports were standard practice. Body camera malfunctions were routine. Supporting each other's lies was considered basic loyalty. Complaints from citizens were ignored or suppressed. The entire system was designed to protect corrupt officers and punish anyone who challenged their authority. And no one in departmental leadership stopped this? Collins asked. Captain Reynolds knew everything. He never explicitly endorsed our tactics, but he made clear that arrest numbers and conviction rates mattered more than constitutional rights. As long as our statistics looked good, he didn't ask questions about our methods. Collins finished her notes and prepared to end the session. Detective Harrison, your cooperation will be noted in your sentencing. But understand that nothing you've told me tonight changes what you did to 67 innocent people. Your confession might reduce your prison time slightly, but it doesn't earn you redemption. Harrison nodded. I know. I just want to make sure everyone involved faces consequences, not just me. If I'm going down, the whole corrupt system should go down with me. That's exactly what's going to happen, Collins confirmed. By tomorrow morning, 7 officers will be arrested. Captain Reynolds will be facing federal charges. The evidence room clerk will be in custody, and the bail bondsman will be indicted for racketeering. Your cooperation is helping dismantle an entire corruption network. As Harrison was led back to his cell, he thought about Judge Diana Foster, the innocent girl he'd destroyed, who had transformed into the judge who would destroy him. The cosmic justice was almost poetic. He'd created his own destroyer through his own corruption, and now that destroyer was systematically dismantling everything he'd built. 2 crimes, 15 years apart, same victim, same detective. But this time the victim had become the judge. 4 months after Harrison's arrest, the federal trial began in the same courthouse where Diana Foster now served as a judge. Due to obvious conflicts of interest, Judge Robert Palmer presided over the trial instead of Diana, but she sat in the gallery watching justice unfold. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, civil rights advocates and victims of Harrison's corruption. The case had become national news. A corrupt detective finally held accountable after decades of destroying innocent lives. Lead prosecutor Sarah Mitchell stood before the jury delivering opening statements. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a 25-year crime spree committed by a man who wore a badge while destroying innocent lives. Detective Marcus Harrison systematically planted evidence, filed false reports, committed perjury, and violated the constitutional rights of at least 67 people we can definitively prove, and likely many more we haven't identified. Mitchell pulled up the first piece of evidence on courtroom screens, Harrison's body camera footage showing him assaulting Diana Foster. This video captures Detective Harrison's assault on Judge Diana Foster, a federal judge approaching the courthouse for her first day of work. Watch carefully. The courtroom watched in silence as Harrison backhanded Diana across the face, grabbed her throat, and slammed her against the courthouse wall. Several jurors visibly flinched at the brutality. But here's what makes this case extraordinary, Mitchell continued. Judge Foster wasn't just any victim of Detective Harrison's violence. She was someone he'd destroyed once before, 15 years ago, when he planted drugs in her car and testified falsely to ensure her wrongful conviction. Mitchell displayed Diana's mugshot from 15 years ago, next to recent photos showing her in judicial robes. This innocent 19-year-old college student served 3 years in prison for a crime she didn't commit because Detective Harrison needed to pad his arrest statistics. She was exonerated only when the real criminal confessed on his deathbed. The prosecutor walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. During those 3 years in prison, Diana Foster studied law. After her release, she earned a law degree, became a civil rights attorney, and was eventually appointed as a federal judge. She transformed her trauma into expertise, specifically to hold corrupt officers accountable. Oh, and on her first day in the courthouse where she'd been wrongfully convicted 15 years earlier, Detective Harrison assaulted her without recognizing that his past victim had become his future judge. That's not coincidence, ladies and gentlemen. That's cosmic justice. Defense attorney James Wilson stood for his opening statement, his task nearly impossible given the overwhelming evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, Detective Harrison has made mistakes. He acknowledges serious errors in judgment. But the prosecution wants you to believe this was systematic corruption when it was actually a veteran officer who became overwhelmed by the pressures of law enforcement in dangerous neighborhoods. The defense theory was that Harrison had acted improperly but not criminally, that his actions were the result of stress and departmental pressure rather than deliberate corruption. It was a weak argument, contradicted by mountains of evidence, but it was the only defense available. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution methodically destroyed Harrison's defense by presenting overwhelming evidence of systematic corruption. Agent Rebecca Collins testified about the FBI investigation, revealing 67 victims. Dr. Patricia Chen testified about forensic evidence proving Harrison had a single supplier for his planted drugs. Officers Bryant and Hughes testified about witnessing Harrison plant evidence and fabricate reports. Most devastating was Harrison's own confession, recorded during his cooperation agreement. The jury listened in stunned silence as Harrison admitted planting evidence maybe 50 times, deliberately targeting innocent people to pad his statistics, and systematically lying under oath to ensure convictions. On the 11th day of trial, Diana Foster took the witness stand. The courtroom fell completely silent as she was sworn in, the moment when the victim confronted her destroyer in formal legal proceedings. Prosecutor Mitchell approached carefully. "Judge Foster, can you identify the man who destroyed 3 years of your life by planting drugs in your vehicle and testifying falsely at your trial?" Diana pointed directly at Harrison. "Detective Marcus Harrison seated at the defense table. And can you identify the man who assaulted you on the courthouse steps 4 months ago?" "The same man, Detective Marcus Harrison." Mitchell pulled up Diana's testimony from her original trial 15 years ago. "Judge Foster, when you were 19 years old and facing prison for a crime you didn't commit, did you ever imagine you'd someday sit as a federal judge in this courthouse?" Diana's voice was steady but emotional. "Every single day I was in prison, I imagined the moment when I'd have the power to ensure no one else suffered what I suffered. I studied law books in the prison library. I read Supreme Court decisions. I learned criminal procedure. I transformed my rage into education because I knew that knowledge and authority were the only weapons that could defeat corruption." "What did you feel when Detective Harrison assaulted you 4 months ago?" Diana paused, choosing her words carefully. "I felt violated and afraid in that moment, but afterward, when I realized what had happened, I felt something else. I felt ready. I'd spent 15 years preparing for the moment when I could hold corrupt officers accountable. Harrison gave me that opportunity by revealing his corruption so blatantly that no one could deny it." Mitchell displayed the courthouse security footage again. "Judge Foster, when Harrison struck you across the face, what went through your mind?" "I thought about the 19-year-old girl he'd destroyed. I thought about the 67 other victims we've identified. I thought about every innocent person whose life was destroyed by corrupt officers who believed they were untouchable. And I thought, not anymore, this ends today." The courtroom erupted in applause before Judge Palmer gavelled for order. Even some jurors were visibly crying at Diana's powerful testimony. Harrison's defense attorney cross-examined carefully, knowing that attacking Diana too aggressively would alienate the jury. "Judge Foster, isn't it true that you specifically requested assignment to this courthouse, hoping to encounter Detective Harrison?" "Yes," Diana admitted. "I requested this assignment because I knew Harrison worked here, and I wanted to be in a position to review his cases if evidence of corruption emerged." "So you were looking for an opportunity to target him?" "No," Diana corrected firmly. "I was looking for an opportunity to ensure justice was served if he continued his corrupt practices. I didn't set him up. He revealed his own corruption by assaulting me without provocation." The cross-examination went nowhere. Harrison's own actions had destroyed any possible defense. After 3 weeks of testimony, closing arguments began. Prosecutor Mitchell delivered a passionate summary of the evidence. Detective Harrison destroyed at least 67 lives through systematic corruption spanning 25 years. He planted evidence, filed false reports, committed perjury, and violated constitutional rights. The evidence is overwhelming, the proof is undeniable, and justice demands a guilty verdict on all counts. Defense attorney Wilson made a desperate final plea. Detective Harrison made mistakes driven by pressure and stress. He cooperated fully with investigators and provided testimony against other corrupt officers. He deserves mercy for his cooperation. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all 47 federal counts. Harrison showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but his hands shook as he realized his life was effectively over. Judge Palmer scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Harrison would face a minimum of 40 years and maximum of life in federal prison. His cooperation would be considered, but the severity of his crimes made significant leniency unlikely. As Harrison was led away in chains, Diana watched from the gallery. She felt no joy in his destruction, only satisfaction that justice had finally been served after 15 years. The scared 19-year-old girl who'd been destroyed by corruption had transformed into the federal judge who delivered accountability. The circle was complete, and justice had been absolutely served. 2 crimes, 15 years apart, same victim, same detective. But this time the victim had become the judge. Sentencing day arrived 2 weeks after Harrison's conviction. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity with media representatives, civil rights advocates, and dozens of Harrison's victims who wanted to witness his final judgment. Extra security filled the hallways due to the case's unprecedented national attention. Judge Robert Palmer entered and surveyed the packed courtroom with grave authority. "This court is now in session for sentencing of Marcus Harrison, convicted on 47 federal counts, including assault on a federal officer, conspiracy to violate civil rights, evidence tampering, and perjury." Palmer looked directly at Harrison, who sat at the defense table looking decades older than 4 months earlier. "Mr. Harrison, before I impose sentence, I will allow victim impact statements. 23 of your victims have requested to address this court." For 2 hours, Harrison's victims told their stories. A man who spent 12 years in prison for drugs Harrison planted. A woman who lost custody of her children because of Harrison's false arrest. A young man whose college scholarship was revoked after Harrison's fabricated charges. Story after story of destroyed lives and broken families. Diana Foster was the final victim to speak. She approached the podium with the same dignity she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. "Your Honor, I stand before you as evidence of what becomes possible when trauma transforms into purpose. Detective Harrison destroyed 3 years of my life when I was 19 years old. He planted drugs in my car, testified falsely at my trial, and watched me get convicted without guilt or remorse." Diana's voice grew stronger. "But he did not break me. Those 3 years in prison taught me more about justice and corruption than any law school could have. I learned to recognize the patterns that enable corruption. I learned to identify the tactics that bad cops use. I learned to fight back using law and evidence rather than anger and revenge." She turned to face Harrison directly. "You thought you destroyed me, Detective Harrison. But you actually created me. Every day I spent in prison studying law books was preparation for this moment. Every case I worked as a civil rights attorney was practice for holding you accountable. Every decision I made as a federal judge was building toward the day when your corruption would finally face justice. Diana paused, her eyes blazing. But this is not about my personal revenge. This is about the 67 people whose lives you destroyed. This is about the hundreds more we probably have not identified. This is about a system that enabled your corruption for 25 years because you wore a badge and your victims did not matter, she concluded firmly. Your Honor, I request that you impose the maximum possible sentence on every count. Detective Harrison deserves no mercy, no leniency, no consideration for his supposed cooperation. He destroyed innocent lives systematically and deliberately for 25 years. Justice demands complete accountability. Judge Palmer nodded gravely. Thank you, Judge Foster. Mr. Harrison, do you wish to make a statement before I impose sentence? Harrison stood shakily, his lawyer supporting his arm. Your Honor, I am sorry. I am truly sorry for everything I have done. I know my apologies are worthless, but I want these victims to know that I understand the pain I caused. I was wrong. I was corrupt. I deserve whatever punishment you impose. Palmer's expression remained stern. Mr. Harrison, I have presided over criminal cases for 30 years. I have sentenced murderers, rapists, drug dealers, and corrupt politicians, but I have never encountered a defendant who abused authority as systematically and destructively as you did. He pulled out the sentencing memorandum. You were not just a bad cop. You were a criminal enterprise masquerading as law enforcement. You destroyed 67 lives we can prove, and likely hundreds more we have not identified. You corrupted other officers, undermined public trust, and betrayed every oath you ever took. Palmer's voice grew harder. Your cooperation does not earn you mercy. Your apologies do not erase your crimes. Your tears do not restore the lives you destroyed. He lifted his gavel. On count 1, assault on a federal officer. I sentence you to 20 years. On counts 2 through 25, I sentence you to 15 years concurrent. On counts 26 through 47, I sentence you to 10 years concurrent. Total sentence, 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The gavel fell with finality. You will die in prison, Mr. Harrison. That is exactly what you deserve. The courtroom erupted in applause. Harrison collapsed into his chair, his life officially over. Diana sat in the gallery feeling 15 years of weight lift from her shoulders. Justice had finally been served. Thank you to everyone who typed justice and shared your locations with us. Seeing this global community, united for accountability and truth, proves that justice is a universal human value. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more stories of redemption triumphing over corruption. Until next time, remember that no matter how dark the past, transformation is possible, and justice will always find its way.